Stephen King has villains ranging from everyday people to quasi-immortal vampires to dancing clowns, and it brings about a lot of discussion as to who some of the best King villains are. And today I am going to discuss my personal top 5 villains from Stephen King's universe. First up, Randall Flagg is one of Stephen King's longest standing villains. He's appeared in timelines as early as the Middle Ages with the Eyes of the Dragon, and just knowing that he's been around since the Middle Ages kind of makes him a pretty big threat because he has lasted hundreds, if not thousands of years, and you see that happen with the Eyes of the Dragon and throughout the Dark Tower novels, and even in his appearance in Gwendy's Button Box. There is a huge span of time that Randall Flagg has been around. And, my one, I guess, complaint is what you could call it about Randall Flagg is that he has way too many names. A lot of them are just names that have the same initials RF, and you have other names like the Dark Man, the Man in Black, and some others that are just maybe not quite as clever as I would have hoped King would be when giving this man, or not even a man, because obviously men don't live for thousands of years. So giving this character so many names, I was, kind of surprised by how many were just, okay. But that does not take away from how menacing Randall Flagg is. And visually, he's been portrayed by Jamie Sheridan, Matthew McConaughey, and Alexander Skarsgård on screen, both big and small screens, because you have the 94 Stand miniseries, you have the latest Stand miniseries from 2020, and then in 2017, we had the Dark Tower movie, which I won't go into too much detail on how disappointed I was with that, but even though you have different visual representations, Matthew McConaughey is very much so the Man in Black, whereas Jamie Sheridan and Alexander Skarsgård are in all denim, pretty much. So there are two different visual elements to the character throughout those three adaptations, but I think it still gets across the point that he's willing to do whatever he wants. It doesn't matter if he's dressed in all black or in all denim. He is going to go all out. He turns Vegas into chaos in The Stand, and you just see so much of this character throughout King's works that you really can't ignore Randall Flagg as one of King's best villains. And obviously we all have our personal opinions on which villains we love more than others, but for me, Randall Flagg was just too hard to ignore because of how present he is and how mysterious he is. There's still a lot about Randall Flagg that we don't know, and it seems like he's capable of so much because of that supernatural element to the character. However, there's another supernatural character I want to talk about, and that's Pennywise, or It, if you will, but I'm going to use Pennywise for this just because I find it a little easier to follow along using the Pennywise name instead of just saying it in the middle of a sentence. But Pennywise stands out because of the fact that this character is represented for the most part as a menacing clown. Pennywise doesn't really come to us in human form all that often. It does happen. We see it in It Chapter 2, and you see how different the character feels in that moment. Not quite as intimidating or menacing as the clown version of the character, or even the spider version of the character, but either way, the fact that Pennywise can shapeshift and the fact that Pennywise kills kids and really just terrorizes Derry once every 27 years, you never really know what to expect, because in 27 years, you could have an entire generation of people who have either moved on or forgotten what happened the previous time that Pennywise appeared. And you also have all of the different ways that Pennywise can just harass people. You have the scene in Beverly's bathroom where it becomes, ironically, a bloodbath. And you have the scenes where Pennywise is presenting Georgie to Bill, and putting this hope in Bill's head that Pennywise takes away in a matter of seconds, especially when Bill sees Georgie in the flooded basement. And you have just such terrifying moments with Pennywise because of the fact that he's targeting kids and because kids are, sort of sacred. Anyone who hurts children or kills children especially is at the bottom of the food chain. Pennywise encapsulates all of that, even though Pennywise is not a person. And you have that added element, which is the fact that Pennywise is not a person. They don't know how to kill him. And I do think that your villains are only as good as your heroes. And I absolutely love the Losers Club. I think that their interactions with Pennywise as a kid is what makes them the heroes that they are, and it shapes them for the rest of their lives, even if they forget about all of that stuff once they leave Derry as adults, with the exception of Mike, who stays. But I really do think the fact that this encounter with Pennywise shaped their lives so much just goes to show how the kids were as heroes and how big of a villain Pennywise was and how much of an impact that had on them. One more supernatural character to discuss, though, and that is Rose the Hat. So with Rose the Hat, I didn't really know what to expect because I watched the movie before reading the book, and I didn't really look into the cast too much besides knowing that Ewan McGregor was going to be playing Danny. So Rebecca Ferguson's performance as Rose the Hat was amazing and immediately made me intrigued by the character because, she's this quasi-immortal vampire, and not in the way that you have vampires in Salem's Lot either. King put a different twist on the True Knot, and Rose the Hat is smart. She plans. She doesn't just go into things without a plan. And she also puts other people in danger before putting herself in danger, which, as someone who is sort of the head of the True Knot, makes sense. She's going to send people out to do those things for her. And with Rose the Hat, you also have the fact that she kills kids too, like Pennywise. And she prefers kids who have the steam, and it gives them more nutrients, I guess, so that they can keep on going. And she gets in this big fight with Abra, a fight of the mind, really. She can get inside your head too, which means you cannot hide from Rose the Hat. So that is what makes her such a good villain too. Abra and Danny can't really go anywhere without her being able to find them, and they do use that to their advantage though, so I did like that at least. But as far as Rose the Hat goes, she was really fun to watch, really fun to read about because the book dives a little deeper into her character. But what I would really love to see is some sort of prequel from Stephen King about Rose the Hat prior to the True Knot finding out about Abra and Danny and everything that went down at the Overlook location. And there's so much with her character that I think could still be explored. And that's why I really ended up liking her as a villain too. There's still so much we didn't get to find out about her. But before we move on, if you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, get notified when I have new videos. It really does help, and I really appreciate it. And now we are going to dive into a couple of more human villains, if you will. So the first one I want to talk about is Annie Wilkes. She is someone who clearly suffers from mental illness. We see this in Castle Rock Season 2 when she is portrayed by Lizzie Kaplan. And she has this concoction of medication that has to be very specific for it to work. And you see how quickly things spiral when she doesn't take it. So you have that added element to Annie Wilkes' story, which really begins when King released Misery. And Castle Rock is not based on source material, but it does do a nice job of giving us a look at Annie Wilkes pre-Misery. But Misery is really what I want to focus on here because Kathy Bates gave an absolutely iconic performance. She is Paul Sheldon's #1 fan, and anyone who is a writer's #1 fan and then proceeds to smash their ankles and feet up is not a fan I want to know. And what makes Annie Wilkes so villainous is the fact that she is a real person who is capable of doing all of these things. We see what she's capable of in Castle Rock season 2, where we see her kill way more people than she kills in Misery. But with Misery, because of how isolated that story is, you really get a feel for who Annie Wilkes is as a person and how she thinks, how she operates. And that is just one of the best things about King having this take place in Colorado. You have her on this pretty big piece of property, so she doesn't have neighbors. She doesn't have anyone coming and questioning what's going on. And when she does, she kills them. So, I have really enjoyed spending time with Annie Wilkes, despite her not being a fun person, But I think as a character and as a villain, there's a lot there that you can really dig into. And certainly, last but not least, I want to talk about Jack Torrance, because for me, Jack Torrance isn't a villain when the Shining novel begins. He's not a fantastic person by any means, but he's also not someone who is going around killing people or anything like that. Instead, it's the Overlook that makes him that way. And I think when you have that added element of this person is very much towing the line between good and evil, if you will, how he was pulled to the side of evil and how that unraveled throughout The Shining. And yes, I know a lot of people think of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining when you talk about Jack Torrance, and Jack Nicholson gave an amazing, amazing performance. So I don't blame anyone for thinking of that first, but the way that Kubrick told the story was that, it really felt like Jack was already evil before arriving at the Overlook, and it just became worse as they spent more time there. But in the book, you have a bit of a different element at the beginning and at the end of the story than you do in the Shining adaptation, and you see something closer to the source material in the 1997 miniseries. So for me, that was kind of what I loved about Jack Torrance, was the fact that he wasn't pure evil from the start. He became that way because of the influence of the Overlook, and he then tried to kill Wendy and Danny, and anyone who tries to kill their own family is obviously pretty villainous and pretty evil. So that is really what made that character extremely interesting for me, because it wasn't your typical, oh, this person is already bad, we are going to just have them stay that way or get worse, kind of like Randall Flagg or Pennywise or Rose the Hat. And you could kind of say the same about Annie too, because when we see her in Castle Rock season 2, we see her as, sort of this innocent teenager, but things quickly turn for her, much as they do for Jack. And because she's so much younger, she does spend a longer amount of time as a villain. So those are my top 5 Stephen King villains. Let me know in the comments who your favorite Stephen King villains are. I know there are so many to talk about because of how many books he has written, and I really did pick 5 that were pretty big in my opinion. There are definitely some villains that I did not discuss who would be worthy of a discussion. So maybe that's another video for another day where I sort of break down some more of King's villains. But that's all I have for you today. So thank you all for watching.